Hey there, welcome to the DFS Build NBA edition. I'm Kevin Roberts on this Saturday, January 11th, going over the 3-game NBA DFS slate at DraftKings. It was 5 games, but the Fires in California have eliminated 2 of the games for the Clippers and Lakers games. So still a palatable slate at 3 games, but it obviously is going to be a little bit different than it was the last few days where we had 7, 6, 8 games. Less wiggle room when it's only 3 games, but certainly a lot better than a showdown or just 2 games. So I think we can maneuver it. The real question is going to be up top. Do you play Cade Cunningham into ownership or not? He has the best ceiling and everything. So we'll get on that in a bit. Before I get started, if any of this helps you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and consider joining our Discord. You can find the Discord link in the bottom of this video or on our YouTube channel. And also, if you do NFL DFS, I have a Saturday video for today for the 2-game slate. It starts at 3:30 Eastern, I believe. So you can check that out at the end of this video or head to our YouTube channel to check it out. And then we also have an NFL DFS main slate for Sunday. Probably no Sunday NBA video, but I wanted to push one out today. Obviously, yesterday was not a ton of fun for a lot of people because if you didn't have Giannis and or Sabonis, you probably weren't going to cash even. I mean, it was a really rough cash night. We did like the strategy of waiting on Jokic. That paid off. He had 85 fantasy points, best play of the night. But really, you had to have a lot of things go your way, even for that to get you to the money line there. And it was pretty ugly, but hopefully we can bounce back on this 3-game slate and get it going. So since there's only 3 games, I'm going to go team by team here and just kind of profile the best plays and then try to relate that to the slate. So let's get started with the Raptors. We've got Raptors at Detroit. Nice 230.5 total here, only a 4-point spread. So this looks like one of the better games to stack for sure. I mean, it's 3 games. So like honestly, all 3 of these games do look pretty appealing. They all have pretty tight spreads. This is probably the best one. And then Memphis and Minnesota is right behind it just because that one has a little bit more defensive aptitude on both sides of the ball. But Memphis does push the pace. So, I mean, honestly, you can really do whatever you want as far as game stacking. But I'm just going to talk about the plays that I would prioritize. So starting up top with Scotty Barnes, the projection does not look amazing. These projections are not fully updated, so don't fully buy into that just yet. It's not shocking, though, that he is the best projecting option for the Raptors just because he just went off in his last game. What did he get? He had 54 fantasy points. That is the kind of ceiling that he could deliver. 5 games ago, he had 64 fantasy points against the Nets. Earlier this year against the Pistons, he had 65 fantasy points. So we know Barnes has a massive ceiling. Pretty good floor, soaks up a lot of usage. Obviously, the Raptors are a little bit tough to get to when all their guys are in, and that is certainly the case with Barnes, Barrett, and Quickly there. But I think all of them are playable. I just wouldn't really stack up the Raptors and like load up all these guys. Barnes looks like the best play. He's only $500 more than Barrett. He does more things out there than Barrett does. He's a better per minute guy. Here, I wish this thing was sorted a little bit better here. No, that's the per dollar. Let's find the per minute. Usually it's right there. I can't find it. Okay. Anyways, point is he is a better per minute player than Barrett is, but both are good plays. I just think I definitely prefer Barnes at only $500 more, and he's coming in with a better projection. I think if you're going to pair him with somebody, it's going to be Quickly or Pirtle for me. Those guys are just way too cheap. Obviously, they don't have crazy projections, but they're really, really nicely priced. I think of the 2, I prefer Pirtle just because he has a clearer path to a double-double and just a safer floor in general, but Quickly also looks pretty good. So the thing here to consider on a 3-game slate is if I'm quickly eyeing Barrett as the odd man out, he's probably going to be pretty contrarian. So just in the name of what happened yesterday, like Sabonis and Giannis were not really optimal plays. Sabonis on the road against the Celtics, not great. Giannis on the road against the Magic, not great. Actually, I think he was in Orlando. Regardless, Orlando's not a fun matchup whatsoever. Certainly not a great matchup for DFS. And Giannis at 73 fantasy points. So, sometimes matchup and, less than ideal circumstance just leads to a really good play in general being completely overlooked. And sometimes that can be enough. Like if they're a really good player and nobody's going to be on them, you can take a shot on them. So that might be Barrett on this slate. It's just, for me, I'm probably not going to go there. Grady Dick is an okay value at 4.6. If you're still in like that 5.5K range, I wouldn't be interested, but he does get minutes. He can heat up as a scorer, and he's only 4.6K, so I do not mind taking a chance on him at all. But that's probably about where I would stop with the Raptors. Olenek, Bruce Brown, all these guys, they'd be a bit too thin on this slate. I think if Bruce Brown, if we can think he's going to actually get 20 minutes like he's projected to here, I think he's an okay punt just because, you will want to consider some guys really, really deep down to open things up for your lineups. You can really maximize your ceiling here, but I feel like that might be a little bit too thin. So in summary, love Scotty Barnes, and I think everybody else is in play. If I was going to pick a second Raptor, it would be Pirtle. All right, over to Pistons. Cade Cunningham has the best projection of the slate. He's going to look really good. He's not cheap at 10.4K, but he's Cade Cunningham. Obviously, he can be a beast. The Raptors are a very, very palatable matchup. One of the better matchups of the slate. He only had 40 fantasy points in 36 minutes against them last time, but I wouldn't read too much into that. He can certainly get it done. He's going to be pretty chalky. It's only a 3-game slate here, so if you want to eat the chalk, I don't have a problem with that. I probably will, honestly, just because the odds of him doing, meeting expectation or greatly exceeding are pretty good. So on a 3-game slate, bypassing the best overall play feels dicey at best. The nice thing is we don't have to go play any other Pistons if we don't want to. The matchup with the Raptors is good. Jalen Duren, nice price at 5.5K. Nice matchup against the Raptors. Certainly he could get there pretty easily. The only issue is his minutes are extremely tough to trust. He did play 31 minutes last game. He has had 31 plus fantasy points in 3 straight games, so that's encouraging. And in 2 games against the Raptors, he's averaging 33 fantasy points per game. So he's cheap enough that I don't mind taking a chance on him in tournaments, but certainly a risky play. Malik Beasley at 5.6K, he's going to get minutes. No Jaden Ivey, so he's still going to be viable. At 5.6K, I think he's a solid value in the lower mid-range. 33 and 36 minutes in his last 2 games. He's been hitting shots, getting 30 and 38 fantasy points in those games. So that is what he can bring to the table for sure. So if that's what he's doing at 5.6K, yeah, let's fire him up. The only problem is 3 games ago in a good spot against the Blazers, he shot 1 for 10 and had 14 fantasy points. He's just one of those thin plays that is not going to get there unless he scores 20 real points. So Beasley is a good play in a vacuum, 5.6K for a guy who's going to play 30, 35 minutes in a really good matchup. I do not mind him at all. He projects decently. Just know that he's not a safe play by any means. He is in the price range of a borderline core play so far on this slate, though, so I definitely have him on my radar. Tobias at 6.2K, getting a little bit priced up, but we know the minutes are good, and obviously, just like everybody else here for the Pistons, the matchup is good. He's been solid, but not really elite. He hasn't topped 30 fantasy points in any of his last 3 games, and he's only had 25 fantasy points per game across the 2 meetings with Detroit, or with Toronto, rather. So I think he's an okay play at 6.2K. I would just much rather roll a dice on Duren or Beasley in a similar price range. They project better and they're cheaper. Tim Hardaway Jr. I think is questionable for this game, so keep an eye on that. That could actually be pretty big news. Tim Hardaway himself at 4K flat. If you want to play him, if he's in and starts, we can probably bank on 30 minutes, and he will throw up some shots. And against the Raptors, I think that's worth noting. Very thin play, much more thin play than Beasley or any of the guys that I mentioned that might be thin plays. Hardaway definitely needs to score a ton of points to hit. So I would keep an eye on his status. So I think he's okay. He's definitely in play on a 3-game slate. But if he's out, we can certainly look at 4.8K Azar Thompson. I would need him to start, though. We've already been through it with Azar Thompson. If he doesn't start, I think he's on a 3-game slate. He would still be in play just because you never know what's going to happen. But he does not project very well. He projects for under 20 minutes as well. So I need him to start to really have the faith there. Isaiah Stewart is an okay punt on a 3-game slate. On a main slate, I wouldn't do it. He's just low ceiling, not the best floor in the world. And he doesn't play a ton of minutes, but 20 minutes off the bench for 3.3K on a 3-game slate, you could do a lot worse. Fontecchio at 3.1K. If he starts and Tim Hardaway Jr. is out, I do not mind him as a punt. He's already projected for 23 minutes and almost 20 fantasy points. So I think he's viable no matter what, honestly. Again, very thin, very risky, but he is viable. And if he starts, I do like him a good amount. All right, over to Memphis. The Memphis-Minnesota game is interesting because both these teams can play really good defense, but Memphis tends to, push the pace. Let me just double check the status of these guys. So it looks like everybody is in. I think, though, let me see. Yeah, so they played 2 days ago, so they should be fine. Everybody should be in. This has been definitely a team that has had a lot of guys out consistently all year. Marcus Smart is still out. Vince Williams is still out. Those are the 2 that would probably be noteworthy, but honestly, for the most part, for Memphis, when they're at full strength, you're looking at Jaren Jackson Jr., John Morant, and Desmond Bane. Like nobody else really pops because those guys are there. And even those guys, due to health concerns, they're going to have their minutes kind of limited. So, and plus you add a not so great matchup on the road with Minnesota. I'm not super interested in the Memphis guys here. They don't project very well. The only thing that's really going to change that is if one or two of these guys end up sitting. As it stands, Jaren Jackson Jr. with everybody in is way too expensive. He's a big no for me. In the name of Sabonis and Giannis, you can certainly play whoever you want on 3-game slate, especially if they're going to go overlooked, but he's just not an optimal play. He does project really well, but I just don't get it. I don't see it with everybody there, Ja and Bane in there. I'm not feeling it at all. So you certainly play him if you want to, if he's not going to be owned. But certainly if he's going to be owned, I don't want him. And in general, I just don't think the floor and ceiling are there with everybody else in. John Morant is John Morant. If he's going to play 30 minutes, I think he's much more palatable. He does not have as good of a projection as Jaren Jackson Jr. because he has more of a hard minutes cap right now. But John Morant has a really nice ceiling. He's a little bit cheaper than Jaren Jackson Jr. Nobody's going to play him because he's limited. So I think he's an okay tournament play, especially on a 3-game slate, especially if you don't want to play Cade. If you don't want to play Cade and you still want some upside and you want a guy that nobody's going to be on, I think John Morant is interesting, but not a priority. Yeah, Desmond Bane to a lesser degree, $1,000 cheaper than John Morant, less of a minute constriction, and projects similarly. So I think he's okay. But that's just the kind of, what I'd say about all these guys. All the Memphis guys are just okay. Like I just don't think they stand out unless we get Ja or Bane or JJJ ruled out. Then things get interesting. Then even with a limit, the guys who would be starting would be a little bit more appealing. Santi Aldama, Zach Edey, Jalen Wells, like all these guys, if their minutes projections and overall projections are okay for their prices. But again, just nobody really stands out. If what we need is Memphis to miss one or two guys, and then we can start talking about values. And then I'll put some core plays early for the day in Discord. And then if I'm able to, I'll update before lock. But, honestly, that would be the only situations if somebody misses for Memphis is Memphis, one of the Memphis guys end up being a core play. All right, so Minnesota, they have the better matchup in this spot. Anthony Edwards looks really, really good. It's going to be interesting what the ownership is going to be. Just because Cade has the best ceiling and floor of all the options. He just feels like the safest. So my guess is on a 3-game slate, Cade is going to be a lot more owned than Anthony Edwards. That said, Anthony Edwards has been, really aggressive. He's been really productive. 53 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games, 19 plus shots in each of those games. His aggression turned down a little bit in his last game against the Magic, but that game also was kind of a blowout. He still played 36 minutes, but he just wasn't needed as much. And also the Magic are just not a very good matchup. So that's not that shocking. I would expect him to get it going again here. Memphis is not a bad defensive team, but they do push the pace. So this should be a pretty explosive game, which should lead to Edwards having a solid outing. Pushing almost 50-point fantasy point projection. He looks great. It's just going to come down to ownership, and what else you want to do on the slate. But if you're not looking at Cade, you definitely should be looking at Edwards, and I certainly don't mind the idea of pairing them together. Julius Randle is kind of cheap, 7.2K, decent projection, pushing almost 40 fantasy points. I don't mind him at all. I don't think he's a priority, but at 7.2K, we certainly should be considering him, and I think he's been doing a lot better lately too. Julius Randle has been picking it up for sure. 50 fantasy points weirdly against Boston 5 games ago, 41 fantasy points last time, but he certainly has had some duds in there too. The price is nice. The projection is good. The game environment is good, but Julius Randle is very, very inconsistent. So that is kind of the package that you're dealing with there. Rudy Gobert, really cheap. Could be needed with Edey in there and Jaren Jackson Jr. So there's that. He has been better overall lately, which is not saying much because he was losing minutes and just delivering some real duds out there. But in his last 3 games, he's had 30-plus fantasy points each time, and he had a 41-point fantasy game 2 games ago. So at the price, I don't mind him at all. I think Gobert is dangerously close to a core play just because he's too cheap. So very much on my radar due to the price alone, and the projection is decent for that price. If you don't want to play Rudy, you can play Naz Reid. who is way cheaper, $700 cheaper. Projection is not that far away. We know he's a really good per minute guy. We know he has really nice usage, and he has closed some games recently. So I think Nasri at 4.7K is one of the better values on the slate, especially if you don't want to play Rudy. Don't think I'd play them together, but it's not the worst thing in the world on a tiny slate. Dante DiVincenzo has been starting games for Minnesota. A little bit dangerous, though, because he doesn't always close the game. They can turn to Mike Conley for that. At 4.9K, though, and starting getting 30 minutes, I think Dante looks like a really good value on this slate. Jaden McDaniels at 4K flat. Very thin play. He needs to hit his shots to pay off, but he plays a ton of minutes, and he is really cheap. So if you're going to get 30 to 35 minutes out of this guy, I do not mind it at all. I think it's a decent value play for sure. Mike Conley also, if he's going to push for 25 minutes, even off the bench, there is the possibility that he ends up closing the game. He still played 20 plus minutes in each of his last 4 games, and he still had 21 plus fantasy points in 3 of those 4 games. So it's just a decent punt and a little bit of a revenge game for him too against the Grizzlies. So I don't hate it. I think I prefer a Dante DiVincenzo. I prefer paying up to 1.4K there, but the projection and minutes and everything, and especially the price, really are not that bad. And then Naw at 3.2K is probably the last guy I'd consider, but I think if I'm going to go all the way down there, I would just go Conley when it comes to Minnesota. All right, so over to Miami and Portland. Last game of the night, Miami is projected to win by 4 in a game with a 218 or 219 total. Probably the worst game of this 3-game slate, but honestly, if everybody's going to think like that, we can consider being a little bit underweight in those other 2 spots and being a little bit overweight here. That is another way to, differentiate yourself on this slate. Another reason, a lot of guys in this game actually project pretty well, specifically Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero. They both look really good. Bam's price has come up $200. Hero's has come down $200. I don't yet have a real hard lean on which one I prefer. I think they just both look good. They project almost exactly the same. Their price range is very, very close. So I do not have an issue with either of them whatsoever. I think Hero technically has the better matchup. If DeAndre Ayton is in there, Bam would have a little bit of resistance down low. But Hero has been pretty good. 44 plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 games. Has monster usage. Bam has been just rock solid too. Really good. 43 plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 and 38 plus in all those last 3. So no problem with either of those guys. I think right now, just due to matchup, I would have a lean towards Hero, also because he's a little bit more expensive. And a lot of the other plays on this slate that people are going to gravitate to are guards. So Hero, just by default, his ownership's going to dip. So he's pretty appealing to end the night with him. Jaquez, even though his prices come up to 5.9K, looks like a really good value. The Blazers are a pretty good matchup. He's a little bit hit or miss, but 61 fantasy points 3 games ago, 43 plus fantasy points last game. Not the best usage rate in the world, but not terrible for a role player in the starting lineup. As long as he keeps starting with Jimmy Butler out, I like him quite a bit. It's still under 6K. Terry Rozier also starting 5.1K in this matchup. Solid play. I would rather get Jaquez, but I do not mind Rozier at all if you want to go there. Nikola Jovic, I think he's still been, for 4.7K here, you could do a lot worse. 28 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. Pretty good usage rate for a guy who's just like a role player for them. But he's been playing really well, so I do not mind him at 4.7K. I slightly prefer him to Rozier just because Rozier is so streaky. And I certainly prefer him over Haywood Highsmith, who just does nothing when he's out there. Highsmith is way cheaper, at 1.2K cheaper, but just does a whole lot of nothing. Don't really want any of these other Miami guys. The only other guy I'd mention would be Alec Burks, just because he's only 3.2K. He has gotten 24 and 18 minutes in the last 2 games, had a nice usage rate last game. You just never know, though, if he's actually going to get burned. It's a 3-game slate, though, so you can certainly do that dice roll if you want. Kalel Ware is kind of like in that same boat. I just don't know how much these guys are actually going to play, so they're a little bit tough to trust. But on a 3-game slate, we certainly can take more chances than we normally would. So on the other side, the Blazers do not project very well, but these are a lot of solid plays that are not expensive, and they have like really good usage. Anthony Simons has been really good, 54 and 44 fantasy points a few games ago, and just like decent, just getting there slightly a little bit under it here. He's like, I think he's just going to be okay to break the slate. There's a wide range of outcomes for him. The nice thing is monster usage. So we know Anthony Simons at 6.8K is going to shoot the ball a ton. And by the way, Miami has been a lot more fast-paced lately, not quite the defensive matchup that they used to be, especially with no Jimmy. So Simons is pretty appealing. I do not mind getting to him at all. The only issue is, like I said before, a lot of good guards on this slate. So could that mean, despite the nice price, that he's a little bit overlooked? Absolutely. Denny Avdia continues to look good. His price is stuck at 7.1. He had foul trouble and got hurt in this game against the Pistons. Against Dallas, he just didn't have it. So that'll happen. But honestly, he's been pretty good. 40, 48, 41 fantasy points for a while now. So I do not mind going back to the well there. Projection does not blow you away. But and the price is, it's come up a little bit, but I do not mind him, especially if people are going to overlook him on a 3-game slate. DeAndre Ayton, we have to keep an eye on. I think he's questionable. Let's double check his status. Yeah, he's questionable. And then Jeremy Grant is out. So Jeremy Grant being out solidifies Denny and also keeps Tumani Kamara on my radar. He starts and gets 30 to 35 minutes. I wouldn't say he's a thin play, but he's an inconsistent play. I do like Kamara, though, at the price range. Yeah, quite a bit. And then if Ayton is in at 6.2K, I don't mind him. I do not love targeting centers against Bam Bam, but that's a very cheap price. We know Ayton has slight nuking ability. But if he's out, we get value with either Donovan Clingan or Robert Williams, who is not in this. He's not in this player pool. Is he out already? No, I don't see him out. I guess, yeah, he looks like he'll be available. So he's just not in the player pool yet. He should pop and look like a really good value. He or Clingan could end up starting here if Ayton is out, and one or both would look like really, really good values. I would kind of lean towards who starts, even though the matchup with Bam is not great. They will just be way too cheap. Clingan is 3.1K. Robert Williams is 3.3K. Both are good permanent guys. Robert Williams, the Time Lord, is just a beast when he's out there. So he would be the guy I would prefer, but I would probably just roll with who starts. And honestly, whoever starts if Ayton is out is definitely a core play for me. But I'll update those core plays as we get going. Hopefully we can have a clear idea of what we want to do before lock. So overall, I think it just comes down to where the ownership is. If Cade Cunningham is massive chalk, I would probably entertain the idea of just doing something else, just because Edwards, Bam, Hero, Barnes, all those guys look really, really good. I would kind of rather have, 3 or 4 of those guys instead of paying up for Cade, assuming the value that, presents itself is palatable. That said, I don't mind playing into ownership on Cade because he's a beast. He can get 60 to 70 fantasy points pretty easily in this spot. I'm okay with either way. I would just pick a side though. I would definitely pick a side. I'd be a little bit under or overweight and just kind of see what else, pops when you're using your lineup tool. All right, that does it for me. Hopefully this helps you out. If it does, smash the like button. Also subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, and also join our Discord so you can get a little bit of extra advice before lock. All right, thanks for watching and good luck.